The idea behind the film Interstellar was to explore the next step in human evolution, portraying Earth as a nest that humanity must eventually leave. Nolan found this concept incredibly exciting and saw it as a unique opportunity to fully invest in that futuristic vision, something that had not been done before. Thomas explained that from the beginning, with Kip Thorne and Linda involved in the script before their participation, the film was intended to be a great science fiction story grounded in real science and plausible theories. Obst recalled Kip as a close friend with whom he often discussed both movies and scientific work. He asked Kip what the most amazing discovery from his work on gravitational waves might be, and Kip's dream answer was a wormhole. Thorne emphasized that what made the film different was the deep integration of real science into the story from the outset. Jonathan shared that his initial mandate on the project was to ensure the science was accurate, aiming to ground the big ideas so audiences could truly feel their reality while still delivering an epic cinematic experience. Nolan mentioned Jonathan had been developing the script at Paramount for several years. They used each other as sounding boards to refine ideas, with Nolan hearing a lot about Jonathan's aspirations and being intrigued. Jonathan noted that they benefited greatly from exchanging ideas, giving each other a sense of direction for their work. When discussing the film's ideas with Nolan, Jonathan sensed Nolan viewed it as an exciting and fun project, sharing a similar enthusiasm. Once the project opened up, Nolan immediately contacted Paramount to get involved. He took Jonathan's draft script, which already had strong characters and situations, and added his own science fiction ideas that he had been developing for years. Nolan grew interested in the idea of higher dimensional artifacts, imagining that human emotions and connections might be manifestations of dimensions beyond normal understanding, something scientifically and spatially linking people in ways not yet comprehensible. The influence of Ken Burns' documentary The Dust Bowl was profound on the film, especially regarding agricultural disaster and the collapse of farming communities. Nolan felt the real imagery in the documentary was more extraordinary than typical science fiction visuals, and he wanted the film's audience to recognize that such disasters could happen and, in fact, had already occurred worse than depicted. Nolan also wanted those involved with the film to embrace the power of imagery. He believed the film needed to rely heavily on strong visual storytelling, more so than in previous projects, where the extraordinary nature had to be shown through images, not just conveyed by the characters' dialogue. Given the film's title and vast universe setting, Nolan acknowledged it had to be the biggest and most ambitious film they had worked on, which would manifest in various creative forms. Early in the design process, Nolan spoke with Nathan Crowley, the production designer, about abandoning futurism and presenting the world essentially as it exists now. Despite the story's future setting, he recognized that trying to predict future fashion or gadgets was futile and sought a more timeless aesthetic. Nolan drew inspiration from films like Koyaanisqatsi and Philip Kaufman's The Right Stuff, which impressed him with its technical achievements. These influences inspired the team to rely more on in-camera effects to create authentic environments for actors, particularly for spaceships, rather than using green screens. They embraced a more adventurous filmmaking approach, including a flexible use of IMAX. Instead of strictly planning what to shoot on IMAX, they took the cameras wherever the scenes naturally suggested, even shooting in claustrophobic spaceship interiors where IMAX seemed unfeasible. The difficulty of maneuvering the large IMAX camera in tight spaces added an extra layer of drama. Hoyt showed the team that it was possible to hand-hold the IMAX camera, a feat never achieved before, allowing much of the film to be shot in IMAX and adding to the film's immersive experience. There was a conscious effort to retain a human element in the film, a common risk in science fiction being the loss of humanity. The production incorporated an organic, people-centered approach across all aspects, from music to miniatures to costumes, aiming to keep the film relatable, tactile, and grounded. Ultimately, Interstellar was about human beings, what unites and divides them, and setting this story in the vastness of deep space offered a fresh perspective to explore those fundamental issues. At the beginning of the movie, the scenes set on Earth depict an idyllic, yet subtly troubled environment, emphasizing the beauty and nurturing qualities of the planet. Thomas reflected that this part of the film was particularly interesting because it contrasts peaceful surroundings with underlying issues. Nolan explained that the film's setting captured the Americana and bucolic ambiance, representing a simpler lifestyle rather than a dystopian world. This choice aimed to deepen the emotional impact of leaving Earth by portraying it as fundamentally livable and appealing. The farm set, built outside Calgary, Alberta, was praised for its magnificent beauty. Although many films set in the Midwest appear similar, the landscape used in this film was actually in Canada, featuring rolling hills and mountains, an ideal grand vista for the story. The farmhouse itself was a vital character in the film, carefully designed and built rather than found in an existing building. The production team chose the perfect location with varied terrain, including a ravine and mountains, to provide interesting visual elements. The interior and exterior designs included real windows with genuine views to create an authentic inside-outside relationship, essential for the movie's realism. Christopher Nolan made sure the house felt like a real, lived-in place before photographing. Aesthetic inspiration for the farmhouse included Andrew Wyeth's paintings like Christina's World, blending tone, color, and texture with practical architectural elements reflecting the demands of the landscape and farming life. During location scouting, the screenwriter observed that cornfields surrounded the set but learned that the corn did not naturally grow there. The crops were planted specifically for the film's script demands. The challenge was finding a place where corn could grow beside mountains, which is unusual and risky due to the climate conditions. Through consultations with agricultural experts and a local farmer living near the Rockies, the film team planted corn at an elevation of 4,100 feet, unusually high and far north for such crops. Initially, the corn grew very slowly and was barely knee-high weeks after planting, causing concern. However, corn's rapid late growth allowed it to reach the desired height by the time filming began. The team managed extensive acreage of corn to achieve the right scale for filming, including 350 acres in one location and another 500 acres elsewhere. This large scale contributed to the realism of scenes, especially those involving action sequences within the cornfield. Filming the chase scenes through the corn was complex due to the tall corn stalks, which could reach 7 to 10 feet, limiting visibility. To address this, a helicopter pilot coordinated with stunt drivers via radio, guiding them through the cornfield for dynamic shots. The drone used for surveillance shots was a large model airplane controlled by a professional RC pilot who faced logistical challenges flying it on set, including transporting between the helicopter and filming locations. Fire effects in the cornfield were achieved using propane for flames and diesel for smoke, with hidden tanks distributed throughout the fields. The production performed multiple takes, gradually moving closer to the fire for increasing intensity while ensuring safety with the ability to extinguish flames between takes. Despite risks, the production team invested in the corn crop, accepting the chance of financial loss if the fields were damaged. Ultimately, the crop thrived, allowing the team to recover costs or even turn a profit after harvesting or using the corn as silage. During the production of The Dark Knight Rises, the team performed a significant amount of dust work, much of which did not make it into the final film. They recognized the potential to cover a large area with dust, utilizing a very safe product commonly used as a food filler that sits in the air and looks like thick dust. Scott Fisher and his crew were responsible for releasing the dust into the atmosphere. Chris Nolan allowed considerable freedom to bring in more machines, materials, and personnel to cover as wide an area as possible. While computer-generated effects could enhance the dust, the goal was to capture as much as possible on camera. Each scene was approached with the intention of using as many dust machines as possible. At the farmhouse location, they positioned themselves upwind to maximize the dust effect, achieving the best possible result. In the town scenes, however, they had to work with the constraint that the dust had to come from one direction. The team maneuvered to positions between buildings or at street ends where fans could be placed to continuously blow dust into the scene. This approach worked very well, capturing a substantial amount of dust on camera. Myers admitted to underestimating the volume of dust produced. On the day of filming, the town was completely covered in dust, but impressively, the cleanup crew managed to remove all traces within 2 days, leaving no visible dust behind. Creating a dust storm through visual effects alone is a very challenging task because dust changes how the lighting interacts within the environment. To achieve a realistic effect that fits the film's tone, practical effects were essential. Jessica Chastain described her experience shooting in Calgary positively, praising the realism of the dust storms created on set, which made it feel as if the world were ending, an effect that was perfect for the film. She noted that working with Chris Nolan meant everything needed to be real and practical, sometimes standing near a fake farmhouse in the middle of a fabricated cornfield during an entirely artificial dust storm. This practicality was a hallmark of Nolan's filmmaking style. Nolan always referred to TARS and CASE as articulating machines rather than robots because to him, the idea of a robot was a machine impersonating a human being. These were machines with a distinct personality and intelligence. The physical form of the machines could be completely unrelated to their minds in a way no creature before had been able to separate mind and body. Nolan found it fascinating to explore the question of what if the most human characters on the ship were the non-human ones. They began with the idea that these robots would have been developed in a time of war. Nolan found something poignant about the idea that these machines would be just as marooned in the moment the story finds them as anyone else. They were essentially military surplus, abandoned. They made the robots ex-military because no one builds a robot just for fun. The military origin justified their existence. This led to a design that was extremely strong, impregnable, and blast-resistant. Nolan was inspired to make the robots very functional pieces of equipment, like a light stand, tripod, or camera dolly, not attempting to make them look like people. They took a minimalist approach, described jokingly as Mies van der Rohe design, focusing purely on function over form. The design unfolded over the course of the film, revealing more functionality. Starting with a box, they experimented with earth magnets and the idea of dividing the block into smaller and smaller blocks, which led to TAR's design. In visual effects, there is often a divide between fully computer-generated characters versus built-on-set for robots. Nolan felt it was obvious that TARS and Case should be something in between puppeteered on set, with the puppeteer removed digitally and augmented with CG for things puppeteering couldn't achieve. Chris and Nathan wanted to keep the robots reality-based, something they theoretically could do. The difficulty was in making the machines walk and move, a challenging puppeteering task. Nolan sought someone who could give life and personality to what was essentially an inanimate object. Casting director John Papsadera recommended Bill, described as a great actor and a clown who could make a stepladder dance. The challenge was for Bill to give personality through limited and restrictive movements. Bill Irwin recalled a conversation with Chris Nolan, who described the characters as machines, shying away from the word robot and calling them articulated planks. Bill was involved early in pre-production, helping figure out the practicalities on set. Initially, the machine was made from lightweight aluminum with a cable system to lift it, but stainless steel was chosen for the exterior, making it 70 pounds heavier and close to 200 pounds overall. The cable system could no longer lift the machine, so they created a compressed air system that allowed easier manipulation. Bill Irwin and another stuntman, Mark Fichera, had to counterbalance the machine by pushing and pulling with their bodies, bending their legs constantly to absorb the machine's weight. Different floors were used on set to test movement, and the machine had to be user-friendly. Due to design limits, almost each gag required a custom-built robot version besides the walkers. Franklin explained that much of the robot's work was through physical puppets, with visual effects used for extraordinary functions. For example, on the water planet, the robot transformed into a giant water wheel to gallop through water and rescue Dr. Brand. Special effects built rigs like an all-terrain quad bike with skinny wheels to cut through water, with painted-out components replaced by CG to simulate the robot's legs. Bill Irwin bore the toughest actor job, often dressed in gray and positioned at the corner behind TARS, sometimes unnoticed. His love for connection and discipline in being on the fringe mirrored TARS's robot nature, conveying emotion even without speaking. Bill found it intriguing to make a very human relationship out of his one-to-one connection with the machine, describing TARS as his best buddy on the ship. Matthew McConaughey immediately related to the machine as a partner, calling Bill slick. TARS and Case had different functions for characters. Case was imagined as softer and less experienced, while TARS was a grizzled, hardened officer with a marine-like sense of humor. Bill brought a lovable quality and personality to TARS, making each robot character distinct. Despite the physical challenges, Bill always brought a smile to his work. The role demanded nearly every aspect of the acting craft, offering a fascinating proposition for a physical actor. It was very important to him that the music did not adhere to the film's genre. He wanted to engage Hans in a very pure, creative process. Hans Zimmer was working on a completely different movie when Chris Nolan told him, if you were to write one page of something, without revealing the movie's plot. Chris gave him one day to write whatever came to mind. Hans started writing freely. Nolan wrote some dialogue mixed with ideas behind the film for Hans to get started, deliberately, without any genre or scale indications, to free him from constraints. Zimmer explained that Chris was tricky. The story was about a father and his relationship to his son, but later it was revealed that the son was actually a daughter. Zimmer wrote a piece expressing what it feels like to be a father and have a son, drawing from his own experience. When Hans played the piece of music that became the basis for the entire score, Nolan thought it perfectly captured the emotional qualities he wanted for the film. Only then did Nolan tell him it was a large-scale science fiction film, but provided no clues about the specifics or genre, emphasizing that it was neither an action film nor a Batman film. Nolan believed this approach firmly set Hans on a path related to the heart of the film. He listened to the music extensively while finishing the script and during production. Zimmer noted that both he and Chris wanted to avoid repeating ideas from their previous 9 years of Batman work. They deliberately left out familiar elements and aimed for a whole new musical palette. Nolan requested the use of a church organ and emphasized a feeling of religiosity, despite the film not being religious, because cathedrals and organs represent mankind's attempt to portray the mystical or metaphysical, something beyond the everyday. Unlike many films, Chris's films did not use pre-existing music until the composer composed the score. Hans came on early and recorded musical ideas and suites inspired by conversations with Chris. This process helped them see what could work alongside the images. Hans then supplied more music pieces based on further conversations, developing themes with the help of a talented music editor, Alex Gibson, through ongoing cutting, manipulation, and feedback. After developing demos, they went to Temple Church in central London with a mobile recording system to re-record the organ for several days. Hans is a strong advocate for live, human performances, believing they add an extra special magic, which they found abundantly with Roger, the organist. Roger was an extraordinary and humble player who brought special qualities to the performance. The organ had been used in films before for weddings or horror moments, but being the main driving force of the soundtrack was unique for this project. Zimmer described the organ as a huge, complicated synthesizer. Pipes produce sound when air blows through them, creating one pitch at a time. Adding more pipes changes the tone color, allowing for very complex harmonic structures. Chris, Hans, and Roger explored various voicings and tonal colors, discovering the organ's full possibilities. They experimented with various sounds, with Roger trying different voice settings and Hans and Chris providing feedback on what worked and what needed to be darker or softer. Playing the organ is a physically demanding task, requiring the movement of arms to pull stops, crossing hands, and operating pedals, making it an active and engaging process. Zimmer said he now truly understood the expression, pulling out all the stops. The power of the organ's low notes is felt physically, resonating in the body and causing windows to rattle due to the force of air pushed into the room, giving a primeval and dangerous quality. The organ's sound is remarkably human because it requires air to produce sound. Each note carries a breath, an exhale, giving a sense of human presence that was crucial to preserve for the film, which explores both space and the humans within it. There is an intimacy and a massive scale in how Hans uses the organ. Shifts in tone and mood can occur within a few bars, helping to orient the audience to the film's language, which contrasts the individual with the cosmic. An orchestra was set up in a beautiful church situated among effigies of deceased knights, capitalizing on the cathedral's remarkable acoustics, which were designed to impress and transport people to other worlds. Without pictures to react to, the quality of an orchestra take was judged by recalling the scene's emotion from the first viewing to ensure the score fit the feeling. During sessions in London, they worked on creating the sound of a giant metronome using violins, woodwinds, and unconventional techniques, such as striking strings with pencils or hitting bass sides to produce interesting sounds. Brass players contributed by tapping their mouthpieces, producing eerie sounds, while the choir added tense, plaintive cries that evoked feelings of being lost or adrift. Chris and Hans discussed themes of solitude and drifting, exploring concepts of false memory, where melodies begin to corrode and morph as they move further from Earth, much like memories do. They experimented with synthesizing natural sounds with real instruments and breathing, emphasizing organic qualities to evoke what might be lost when venturing into space. The entire score, centered around science, used wood and organic, real instruments played by real people, reflecting Chris's preference for shooting on film and Hans's preference for authentic instruments over digital simulations. Ultimately, Hans considered himself a translator of Chris's language and vision, speaking with one unified voice. The spacesuits were designed to be firmly based on existing spacesuit technology that people are familiar with and trust. The suits have a NASA aesthetic, but updated to look a little more modern, rather than a slick sci-fi style. The design aimed to evoke the world of NASA missions without being directly identifiable as a specific mission suit, consistently tapping into a classic astronaut figure with a timeless, yet not overly futuristic look. In the early conception and sketching phase, including sourcing fabric, every piece was created with utility in mind. Each element of the suit has a purpose-nothing decorative. For example, pockets serve to hold items, the backpack and front clips are functional to secure it, and the padding around the edges protects astronauts from bumps. The design process involved close collaboration among the production team to maintain a consistent approach. When developing the suits, portions were quilted, which was appreciated by the directors and incorporated throughout the set to visually tie costumes and surroundings together. Compared to modern NASA suits, the costumes were made slightly sleeker and thinner, especially in the arms and near joints, to allow for easier movement while maintaining a functional appearance. The suits were not pressurized to avoid the bulky, puffy look typical of actual pressurized suits. but they still have a sense of bulk to imply pressurization. Wearing these suits was physically demanding. They weighed around 30 to 35 pounds, got hot, and required cooling undershirts with tubing for ice water, similar to those used by real astronauts. Helmet development was meticulous, ensuring actors could breathe through a system with a fan in the backpack that circulated air via tubes. Microphones inside the helmets enabled clear communication among actors and allowed for recording dialogue during scenes, even in challenging conditions such as those on glaciers with strong winds. This setup was essential because filming with large IMAX cameras is noisy, and the helmets allowed shooting dialogue live without needing post-production replacements. Overall, the suits were hard to wear and required careful handling to avoid falling or fainting, but the actors felt they looked visually impressive despite the physical challenge. The Endurance is described as the main interstellar ship carrying characters beyond the solar system. Its design was grounded in NASA technology, the International Space Station, ISS, and shuttle systems. The creators envisioned the Endurance as a reflection of the ISS's modular character, imagining it as a ship assembled in zero gravity from smaller parts launched on separate missions. This resulted in a somewhat fragile shape that would be impossible to build and launch from Earth due to the stresses of gravity. The ship's circular shape was chosen to represent a craft that spins to create artificial gravity for astronauts, addressing the issue of muscle atrophy caused by long-term exposure to zero gravity. The Endurance is designed as 12 pods divided into groups of 4: engines, habitat, and landing pods. 3 main pods were constructed for filming: the cockpit in the center, the habitat section, and the cryopod. To facilitate filming, the pods were mounted on a giant hydraulic rocker that could tilt 45 degrees in either direction, allowing the pods to be leveled for shooting while maintaining a visible perspective through the interconnected pods. The rocker frame, about 160 feet long, was custom built, with engineered hydraulic components and pistons. The interior technology was designed to reflect current real-world space travel, avoiding glossy or fanciful looks. The cockpit serves as the flight center, incorporating navigation, piloting, and communications, with compact, stowable furniture and whiteboards for plotting orbits. The design draws heavily on NASA references, including the use of numerous handles to assist crew members in moving in zero gravity, emphasizing practicality and function over aesthetics. Much of the ship's interior included retrofitted real-world parts, such as galley boxes from airplanes, to add realism and suggest decades of continuous modification and repair, giving it a blue-collar feel of metal, screws, and elbow grease rather than a sleek, futuristic design. The cockpit area features small windows that protect the crew while providing a limited perspective. A comm room, located below, offers privacy and a view of the space. The Cryopod Lab, the largest part of the set, was designed to resemble a sterile surgical environment with white tiles and medical equipment. The cryobeds could be moved from below the ship to a loading position, and automated elements, such as doors and plastic coverings, contributed to the believability, but required complex coordination to work harmoniously on camera. The filmmakers intentionally avoided expanding the sets to create impossible camera angles. Instead, they focused on authenticity, taking cues from NASA's use of IMAX cameras in small spaces to replicate a specific claustrophobic yet immersive feeling of space travel. Actors benefited from interacting with physical sets rather than green screens, which helped evoke genuine emotional responses, emphasizing the practical, utilitarian nature of life aboard the Endurance. Chris Nolan's movies have a distinctive authenticity that contrasts with their epic scale, achieved by filming in real locations. For a science fiction film like this, visiting actual places grounds the story in reality. Iceland was chosen as the filming location for both Miller's Planet, which is entirely covered in water, and Man's Planet, which is all ice. The crew was familiar with Iceland's terrain from previous work on Batman Begins, especially scenes set in the Himalayas. Iceland offers a unique diversity of extreme landscapes within a few miles, allowing for visually distinct planets. The production initially scouted for the ice planet, but then also located suitable sites for the water planet, particularly deltas where water flows over black volcanic sand into the sea. The water needed to look deep, yet be shallow enough to stand on, perfectly matching the film's fictional world. Filming on location was a major logistical effort, including paving 15 kilometers of road to transport heavy equipment, such as a large crane needed to place the spaceship set. The firm sand beneath the water allowed the heavy spaceship props to be positioned in the middle of the water. Vehicles with oversized wheels could easily drive through shallow water, enabling dynamic filming. The entire crew had to wear waders and work in knee-deep water, which posed physical challenges, but the visual payoff was worth it. Actors endured cold conditions, with some suits leaking water, making the experience even more difficult. The wave sequence involved extensive collaboration, using a mobile rig on an all-terrain vehicle to simulate waves sweeping the spaceship. Meticulous planning was required to synchronize actor movements with the artificial wave effects, combined with detailed physics simulations to realistically portray water movement and the scale of a 4,000-foot-high wave. Filming at the Glacier was physically demanding, but offered unparalleled natural scenery. It was the largest glacier in Europe, presenting a mammoth extreme environment impossible to replicate artificially. The production built full-size sets directly onto the glacier, aging them realistically to appear weathered by ice storms, and had to continuously adjust and rebuild structures because the glacier shifted and melted beneath them. Moving spaceship props across terrain required flatbeds and even helicopters to shuttle crew and equipment to remote locations. The production managed unpredictable wind conditions, sometimes exceeding 100 miles per hour, and took safety precautions by ceasing outdoor shooting when gusts became dangerous. Fight scenes on the ice were rehearsed extensively to avoid choreographed moves, reflecting the raw survival struggle of two scientists. Shots involved sliding on ice sheets and wrestling on the glacier, requiring careful safety checks. The environment itself was an adversary, with avalanches occurring nearby, prompting consultation with expert glacier guides to ensure crew safety. Filming used practical effects wherever possible, such as scenes involving the destruction of a pod set, which could only be destroyed once due to the single physical set. The filmmakers prized capturing effects in camera rather than relying on post-production CGI. Crew members described the experience as physically demanding, but hugely rewarding, emphasizing how filming in authentic, challenging environments brought emotional depth and realism to the movie that could not have been otherwise achieved. The design of the ships aimed to reflect the cutting edge of contemporary aerospace design without being overly futuristic. The filmmakers closely studied the Space Shuttle Endeavour, paying particular attention to the heat shield's tiling, and also visited Elon Musk's SpaceX to observe the design and assembly of modern capsules. This research informed the selection of textures and materials required both inside and outside the ships. The design process began with the Ranger, considered the hero ship, incorporating new 3D design methods and software rather than traditional physical model building. The team 3D printed shapes and tested them, drawing influences from automotive and industrial design while staying true to NASA's aesthetic. Black was used on the ship's underside for re-entry heat protection, with white on top. However, the overall shape was more streamlined and sports car-like than that of a traditional shuttle. Attention was given to details such as window placement and setback, tile patterns, landing gear, engines, and airlocks, balancing functionality without compromising the design. The Ranger's interior featured a permanent standing set with a worn, used quality that reflected long-term use, achieved by using multiple tones of materials to create depth and realism. Instrument panels were fully lit and functional, with practical details such as stowable laptops and complex lighting integrated. Lights were also designed into the walls to provide credible illumination for filming. The seats in the Ranger were hydraulically controlled, allowing them to recline for orbit and rotate with the ship's banking while staying level, providing actors with realistic movement and access to controls. Computer programming was required to synchronize the movement and interaction of the pilot and co-pilot seats. The Lander, by comparison, was designed as a bulky, angular workhorse, resembling a Russian or Canadian cargo helicopter with 4 landing pods that could detach to form a base camp. It featured extensive windows to provide near 360-degree visibility during landing and docking. Since mounting anything to the floor was not feasible, the seats were gimbaled to maintain level orientation through maneuvers. Both the Ranger and Lander sets were large and designed to be disassembled and shipped, then reassembled on location or studio stages. Full-size Ranger and Lander models were brought to Iceland for filming and later returned to Los Angeles for studio shoots. A key challenge was mounting the full-size ships on gimbal rigs for simulated movement, which required specialized engineering to achieve smooth, realistic motions. Director Chris Nolan took an active role in controlling the motion base during filming. The filmmakers prioritized capturing authentic camera perspectives by hard-mounting IMAX cameras directly to the ships, aiming to replicate the immersive, close-up feeling of footage from real space missions rather than distant, hovering cameras. Using full-size ship elements instead of miniatures or CGI enhanced the credibility of textures and surface details, providing a tangible sense of scale and realism. Lighting was carefully managed to reflect real sunlight intensity and shadow casting in space or atmospheric conditions, often using hard, contrasty light to emphasize the singular light source. The docking sequences followed NASA traditions of locked-off cameras to emphasize the procedural, careful nature of space maneuvers, underscoring the difficulty and danger inherent in real docking operations. Shooting with full-size sets designed for exterior work but using them as if they were miniatures was a unique approach that resulted in distinctive on-screen material. Maximizing the use of these practical assets made efficient use of the effort involved in building the ships and contributed significantly to the film's visual authenticity and immersive quality. Nolan believes that visual effects have reached a point where computer graphics have been around so long that there is nothing new or fresh about them as a technology. Now, computer graphics exists as just one of many different techniques. This allows the use of computer graphics for the things they are good for, but filmmakers need a variety of other tricks to convince an audience of the reality of something. The team aimed to create visual effects shots for Interstellar that would be timeless shots that could withstand scrutiny even in the future. Franklin explains that the initial docking sequence is an interesting combination of techniques. A computer-generated space rocket takes off to simulate the launch, but once in space and maneuvering, the focus shifts to the full-size version of the Ranger, a 50-foot-long spacecraft built on a motion-controlled movement base that operates in real time with a steering wheel called a Waldo. This provides a strong sense of physical reality to the spacecraft in the foreground. The Endurance scene coming into view is a 1/15th scale miniature model. It is noted that if Christopher Nolan had his choice, he would prefer shooting in space with real spaceships on location. Since that is not practical, using miniatures is the next best thing. Miniatures have a long history in filmmaking, but are still a viable technique used today. Although spaceship shots used to be mostly created with miniatures, they have become less common. Using physical models helps achieve a tone that matches the gritty, realistic, and grounded feel of the rest of the movie, thereby contributing to the overall authenticity of the story. New Deal Studios built extraordinarily large-scale versions of the ships, which seem too big to be called miniatures. Franklin describes the Endurance as a very large spacecraft, approximately 120 feet across. The model used is 1/15th scale, approximately 15 to 16 feet across, and highly detailed, allowing cameras to get very close while maintaining visual integrity. The team shot the model in a high-resolution film format called VistaVision, which closely matches IMAX. They used motion control photography, where the camera is mounted on a computer-controlled crane for precise movements. Nolan and D.P. Hoyt settled on a very realistic lighting setup, featuring a single, distant light source that represented either the sun or the glow of a distant black hole to ensure highly realistic lighting conditions on the miniatures. Franklin adds that working with very low light levels required keeping the camera shutter open longer than normal. Instead of the standard 24 frames per second, they shot at 3 or 4 frames per second, with exposures sometimes lasting 5 or 6 seconds. The motion control camera allows smooth, slow movements with lengthy camera moves and shots, sometimes taking an hour or more to expose a single pass. They could get about 4 shots a day from the model stage, which was considered a fast pace. Additionally, a 1/5 scale version of the model was built, but only a section approximately 40 feet across was used as the pyrotechnic model for scenes where the spacecraft is damaged. Having as much scale as possible is important for realistic breakup and physics, as smaller models make this harder. At New Deal Studios, explosives were loaded onto the model to break it in half, along with pyrotechnic cables to be cut, and the part was pulled away to simulate destruction. They shot these scenes at 72 frames per second to capture the full detail of explosions, debris, and fire, which would appear in slow motion when projected at normal frame rates. Nolan appreciated that shooting miniatures gives a random quality to how things photograph in real situations, something that cannot be fully replicated in animation. They did use computer-generated spacecraft for distant views or when the miniature couldn't achieve certain effects. However, most shots show either substantial models or full-size spacecraft. By combining these techniques, filmmakers stand on the shoulders of giants, learning from and reusing past techniques in innovative ways, thereby adding to the cinematic language to achieve new visual effects that audiences have not seen before. The filmmakers knew from the very early stages that zero gravity would play a huge part in the movie. They were fortunate to have had a practice run on the gravity effects while making Inception. Some of the similar techniques were used, but they aimed to take it to the next level. A significant part of making Inception look so good was the rehearsal time. During the 7 to 8 week rehearsal period, the team pushed the boundaries of what they wanted to achieve. All the sets were made as rehearsal sets, basically just shells of what would be used on the day, with doubles and stunt people rigging and testing. Creating the zero-gravity effect involved a combination of different elements to make it appear realistic. The team avoided dwelling too long on one trick to prevent the audience from catching on, so they used various techniques to simulate zero gravity. Vertical rigs were used, turning everything on its side. The ships were built straight up, and the camera was positioned to look up through the ship, as if viewed from another angle. The cockpit pod was broken in two and hung as 2 halves. It was an exact replica of the cockpit module that required extensive rebuilding with welding and steelwork to hold everything in place. When shooting, the crew could show people moving into the cockpit or communications areas. To reverse the zero-G effect, the other half of the pod would be built. The Ranger set served two functions. It shot many scenes flat, but the set could be tilted to 90 degrees to achieve zero-G effects. Actors were hung from the ceiling and lowered down, allowing movement in multiple directions. This system utilized a full harness with 4 strings, suspending the actors fully, enabling them to simulate zero gravity by leaning, rising, or inverting with ease. The production developed a relationship with an astronaut named Marcia, who helped consult on the film. She provided videos and pictures from space, which the actors studied closely. They paid attention to how little effort it takes to move or stop moving in zero gravity by observing where hands are placed or how toes hook, highlighting the difference from walking on the ground. A special effects rig shaped like a parallelogram could clamp actors by the hips and work like a seesaw or pendulum. It was balanced with weights to match the actor's weight, allowing the actor to be wheeled around sets in tight interiors without cutting holes in ceilings. Actors had to be harnessed in this way for hours, which was a challenging task. The physical performance of the actors was crucial to making the zero-G effect convincing, especially when wearing large suits. They had to mimic extended movements because in zero gravity, relaxing causes the torso to fall backward and legs to drop, which is not realistic. Actors needed to portray a level of buoyancy, maintaining long, languid lines without sharp angles. It was important to avoid tightening the abs or straining through the midsection. Instead, actors had to work hard to avoid appearing strained with their faces. Chris, the lead, was usually deeply involved and preferred doing things himself to ensure they looked exactly right. This approach was more hands-on than usual, but contributed to giving Chris's movies a distinctive feel and established a strong connection between him and his cast, a connection that resonates on screen. The entire process was highly collaborative, and everything came together so seamlessly that the audience could not see how the zero-G effects were achieved. The initial motivation for the project was to explore real possibilities and investigate the current understanding of gravity's ability to traverse dimensions, gravitational lensing, and the effects of gravity and light around a black hole. The idea was to examine the real science behind these phenomena in a serious manner. Jonathan mentioned that they were fortunate to have Kip Thorne, a leading authority on gravitational science. Kip helped explain complex concepts such as the warping of space, which scatters light similarly to how light scatters off the surface of a rippled ocean. Jonathan found Kip's explanations difficult to follow at first, but Kip assisted by writing out the complex theories. These concepts made them wonder about the kind of mind required to understand such phenomena, noting that wormholes and black holes had never been depicted in Hollywood as they truly appear. This project was the first to base its depiction on Einstein's general relativity equations, illustrating how space and time warp to give rise to gravity, which affects time flow differently in various places, and teasing the possibility of time travel. Jonathan reflected on the surprising discoveries while delving deeply into the science, including creative breakthroughs like understanding that a wormhole is a spherical rather than circular object, a radical notion to most, though obvious to Kip. Kip Thorne explained the origin of the term wormhole using the analogy of a bright red apple with a wormhole inside it. If one imagines being an ant on the surface of the apple, the wormhole offers a shortcut through a higher dimension, connecting two distant points in the universe. The exterior of a three-dimensional hole is a sphere, and the wormhole's side is part of our space, while its interior belongs to a higher dimension. The warping of space creates gravitational effects, causing light passing through to refract in a manner similar to how glasses bend light. Their goal was to create a scientifically rigorous visualization rather than a simple fantasy image. The team worked on calculating light paths around the warped space near a wormhole. The main questions were whether wormholes could realistically exist and if they could occur naturally. Kip stated there was no evidence for naturally occurring wormholes, and that if one were found, it would imply some other intelligence had placed it there, an exciting insight from a storytelling perspective. Paul Franklin noted that black holes had been represented in movies before, but often as giant drains in space, which Kip clarified was inaccurate. Kip described black holes as objects with gravity so intense that no light or signal can escape, bounded by a surface called the event horizon. If the black hole doesn't spin, its horizon is spherical. If it spins, it drags space around like a tornado, making objects inevitably swirl in. Close to the black hole, time slows dramatically compared to far away, so hovering near one could mean years pass on Earth while only a day passes for the observer. Inside the black hole, time flows toward the center, explaining why nothing can escape it. At the center lies a singularity where space-time is infinitely warped and physics as we know it fails. The team embraced the exotic possibilities when visualizing interstellar journeys, especially since Kip could calculate how a black hole would actually appear with gravitational lensing based on current scientific knowledge, although he lacked the computing power to render it visually. Under Paul Franklin's leadership, the visual effects team at Double Negative translated Kip's mathematical data into real visual representations of black holes. Their collaboration yielded visualizations that had never been achieved before, revealing new insights hidden within the physics and mathematics. Kip developed the equations necessary for simulating gravitational lensing, showing how light from stars behind a black hole could circle it multiple times, producing multiple images. Franklin described the black hole as a strange funnel in the sky with a black center and a glowing accretion disk formed by swirling heating gas. When rendered through gravitational lensing, the disk appeared twisted into extraordinary shapes, creating a rainbow-like fire effect around the black hole, which was intellectually understood yet emotionally powerful to witness. Nolan stated that from the outset, they agreed the depiction needed to be comprehensible to the audience, but without excessively manipulating the camera's perspective, the real scientific equations produced beautifully tactile imagery that could surprise viewers. It demonstrated how truth can be stranger than fiction. The team was also keen to create convincing space environments live on stage, advancing imagery so views outside spacecraft windows could hold up as realistic background shots. Digital projectors had improved to the point of being bright enough for front projection, allowing rapid content changes and early production of more or less finished images for use during filming. They used 1 or 2 projectors, which were aligned and corrected in real time with the camera view, making the projected images bright enough to coexist with traditional set lighting and create natural-looking exterior views. This approach allowed flexibility, with projectors moving according to the camera angle and layering multiple projections. Paul Franklin discovered that projecting the same images onto actors in the cockpit generated interactive lighting, synchronized with the changing backgrounds. This technique was used effectively in scenes where Cooper enters a black hole, enhancing immersion with coordinated light shows projected inside and outside the spacecraft windows. Hoytima commented that the IMAX format worked well in low light levels and that the project gave new life to front projection technology. Hathaway appreciated how this method helped actors lose themselves in the scenes, avoiding the distracting doubts common in green screen work because everyone was looking at the same impressive wormhole visuals. The beauty of the wormhole evoked an emotional response, akin to gazing at a great piece of art. Viewing the rotating visuals initially caused motion sickness for the cast. Unlike typical films, where visual effects are added in post-production, this project integrated visual effects into the core filmmaking process from the outset, requiring intense effort on set from all involved. Kip Thorne announced plans to write several technical papers about the project, one targeting the astrophysics community and another for computer graphics researchers. These would share new discoveries about gravitational lensing by rapidly spinning black holes, marking the collaboration as ongoing until these findings are fully communicated. Nolan explained that the Tesseract, towards the end of the film, was one of the most complicated elements to design. It was the project he and Nathan started, and it was the very last thing they managed to finalize. Although it required building a considerable set, that process took a long time. Nolan believed the complexity of the Tesseract would likely be beyond the audience's full grasp while watching the film, as it was based on the idea of suppressing a spatial dimension and substituting time for one of the spatial dimensions, creating an arrangement that displayed time as a spatial element. He felt strongly that if they understood the mathematical rules behind it and stayed true to those rules in building the set and conceiving the visual effects expansion, the audience would sense a logical foundation to the design. A tesseract, Nolan described, is the three-dimensional shadow of a four-dimensional hypercube that has been unfolded. He compared it to unfolding a cube, such as a die, into 6 panels shaped roughly like a crucifix. In a tesseract, each face is itself a three-dimensional cube. When Cooper enters the tesseract, he observes that it shows only one place in space, Murph's bedroom, but at multiple points in time. Nolan and the team developed the idea that all objects in the room, including the room itself, left traces in space-time known as world lines. Cooper cannot physically travel back in time because inside the Tesseract he is outside conventional space and time. However, he can send a message into normal space-time by moving these world lines or extrusions. This sends waves traveling along the world lines that enter the room and influence objects inside it. This concept aligned with Einstein's explanation of gravity as a wave propagating through space-time. Nolan acknowledged that there is often a set or concept in a film that initially confounds the team, causing them to delay its development as long as possible. Various techniques were employed to visualize the Tesseract and its geometry. The first model Nathan built was an infinity box, a set of cubes with half-silvered mirrors, which was an attempt to represent infinite geometries. Although not entirely accurate, it served as a perfect introduction to the surreal concept they aimed to capture. They kept the model for months, but didn't use it again because they were unsure of how to proceed. This starting point led to months of experimentation, with the team making varied models, including extrusions of things, which involved stretching objects in different axes and viewing them through a multi-dimensional prism. Nolan, Chris, and Paul Franklin suddenly had a breakthrough moment when they reoriented a concept, which advanced the design and allowed them to draft it properly. Paul Franklin and his team pursued blue sky research to explore different ways of representing time as a spatial dimension before finalizing the rules set late in production, just before it was possible to build the actual set they would shoot in. Crowley remarked that the design process was intense and practically challenging, requiring the team to build stretchable furniture and a large set measuring around 80 or 100 by 60 feet. Franklin described the long process of digitally recording the shapes of every object in the room and creating extruded shapes that connected different versions of the room. These were then exported for Nathan's art department to physically build. Crowley noted that instead of painting these elements, they printed the textures and wrapped them, creating a large set of stretched components. Lighting the Tesseract was also a challenge. With light coming through a window on one plane, the landscape from inside, and a lit room on the other side seen through glass, they aimed to make the Tesseract feel extremely tactile, tangible, and real. The lighting approach reflected this, as the room and windows were reproduced endlessly in space. Lighting was carefully designed to make direction, spill, and ambient light appear authentically emanating from those windows. Every interior surface had projections running on it, with up to 15 projectors simultaneously used in the final weeks. Some scenes were entirely lit by these projections, effectively using them as a light source. The work within the Tesseract was described as the longest 3 weeks in the stunt team's careers. Chris admitted to uncertainty about the exact movements, as the choreography was still being worked out, so they had to be prepared to fly the actor anywhere within the constructed box. There was extensive wire work and time spent hanging in harnesses. The lead actor, Matthew, spent many hours in a harness. His stunt double rehearsed all actions in advance, and once they were dialed in, Matthew would replicate them repeatedly. Nolan observed that Matthew found the set extremely helpful for his performance because it made a previously abstract script concept tangible. Matthew could finally see how to interact with the environment, which became quite important. Matthew McConaughey reflected that Christopher Nolan and his brother wrote completely new rules for the fourth and fifth dimensions and space-time. These rules were followed through in the film's final third act, creating a highly abstract world. But at the heart of it was a father facing the fact that his daughter, 30 years older than when he left her, believed he had abandoned her. He described love as space-time, the fifth dimension that travels through time forward, backward, up, and down. McConaughey noted that the film explored weighty scientific theories and abstract concepts, but was emotionally grounded by the powerful love between Cooper and his daughter. The filmmakers aimed to strike a balance between emotional clarity and the challenging geometric nature of the sequence. Refining the sequence focused on the emotional side, while execution centered on the mathematical design of the concepts and the portrayal of the fantastical geometry, which became the primary focus of their extended creative process. When he was a kid, Nolan said, everybody wanted to be an astronaut. They all aspired to be astronauts. That desire was one of the reasons he was drawn to telling this story in this particular setting, because astronauts are extraordinary people who deserve to be treated as such. Nolan explained that the idea behind Interstellar, the film, is to explore the concept of human evolution beyond Earth, where the planet serves as a nest, and eventually humans will have to leave it. This is a decision that must be made depending on how one views humanity's place in the universe. The emotional collision of human scale with the interstellar scale is a significant part of the drama, which explores the vastness of space and time, humanity's desire and need to explore it, and the human cost that accompanies it. He described the film as an ode or homage to humans as a species and their abilities. Zimmer added that it captures the basis of the human spirit, the sense of adventure, science, and the impossible in a deeply emotional way, creating a spiritual connection. He believed the film highlights the importance of individual intelligence. He used the example of Cooper, who, despite being required to become a farmer and unable to be an engineer, never let his mind rest, stopped believing, or stopped pushing himself. No matter one's circumstances, individual choice in how to use one's mind is always available. Zimmer shared that he has a curious mind and is never comfortable just sitting back, content. He wants to learn and hopes this movie inspires curiosity in others. Nolan recalled his father saying that the new frontier is not just the Army or the Navy, but the Air Force. It's out there. He believes that humanity will eventually gain a deeper understanding of its place in the universe, becoming less subjective in its thinking and recognizing that humans are not the center of the universe. This will lead to real discussions about the universe. Thorne stated that space exploration is the destiny of the human race. It is something to strive for as a civilization, a culture, and a long-range goal. It is very important for humanity.